We dedicate this opening night and every performance to our friend Jonathan Larson.
Everything you're about to see is true. Except for the parts Jonathan made up.
Hello there, and welcome to a rapidly approaching quarter-life crisis. As I am writing this, it is just days away from the 1-year anniversary of the release of Tick, Tick, Boom, the musical biopic about Jonathan Larson, the creator of Rent, directed by Lin-Manuel Miranda and starring Andrew Garfield. And I am brimming with thoughts, so much that I don't even really know where to start. I suppose a good enough place as any is to say that biopics kind of suck. Not all of them, obviously, but if you pay attention to the ones that are being put out, then you know what I'm talking about. Biopics have a reputation for being fairly mediocre, usually serving as a vehicle for a big-name actor to finally have their serious role by trying to look and act like a real person as much as they can. They're very easy pickings for Best Acting Oscars because they provide a baseline for you to compare the performance to. If Bryan Cranston looks and acts exactly like Stan Lee, then he is objectively a good actor. Bryan Cranston is a great actor, but that's not demonstrated by the fact that he can mimic Stan Lee real well. Although, I would not mind seeing a Stan Lee Bryan Cranston biopic. Anyway, because of all this, biopics can range from okay to pretty bad and still receive high critical praise, which can generate some pretty understandable resentment. There's also been a particular trend within the last 10 years or so in Hollywood of famous musician biopics. You've got Bohemian Rhapsody, Rocket Man, Elvis, and even the upcoming Whitney Houston biopic, I Wanna Dance with Somebody. Somebody Who Loves Me. Oh, whoa, whoa. Just to name a few. And these movies are all very similar, depicting the rise and fall of a usually deceased artist, from childhood to the current day, and the inevitable intense personal issues that they all have. And often they do take quite a bit of artistic license to portray certain people into certain characters, often simplifying very complex people to make them pretty straightforward examples of the tortured artist archetype. Sure, there's no real evidence that Elvis definitely wasn't upset at the death of Martin Luther King Jr., but he was also pretty good friends with Richard Nixon, so it's kind of a mixed bag. Broey Deschanel has an excellent video on this topic if you're more interested in a deeper look. The trend has been so prevalent that there's already a movie parodying this style of biopic, that movie being Weird, the Al Yankovic Story, which released just a couple of weeks ago. And that movie is hilarious, not only because it is in of itself an absurdist comedy, but also because it lampoons so many of the tropes of these biopics. And all of this got me thinking about Tick, Tick, Boom. It's technically a biopic about a famous musician, but there's something about it that makes it work while others don't as much. And honestly, everything that's good about this movie is mostly what separates it from those other entries. It's about Jonathan Larson, first of all. For those of you who are unfamiliar, here's a short crash course. Jonathan Larson was the man who wrote the musical Rent, which is often cited as one of the most influential and game-changing musicals in the last 50 years, if not the history of musical theater. Unfortunately, Rent was the only Broadway show that Larson would ever write, because the night before Rent was set to start previews, he died suddenly of an undiagnosed aortic aneurysm. Larson was someone who, while incredibly talented and with a wide-reaching legacy, never got to see the impact of his legacy. And that's what makes Tick, Tick, Boom different from these other musician biopics. While movies like Bohemian Rhapsody are all about the rise to stardom and the effects that such wild, unimaginable success has on one's psyche, Tick, Tick, Boom is the exact opposite. Throughout the course of the entire film, John never gets his big break. We know that it happens because of the opening and closing narration, but it's not really what the story is about. The closest that he gets is that he is awarded the opportunity to work with the legendary Broadway composer Stephen Sondheim, and even that isn't until the very end of the movie. While in other biopics, that meeting would be the inciting incident. If you're looking through this movie through a purely career-based lens, John barely advances. At the very least, nowhere near as much as other musician biopics. Musician picks? Musipics. So if achieving artistic success is not what the movie is about, then what is? Well, the actual journey the movie takes is quite interesting. It paints an almost intentionally contradictory view of John's life. It shows that he lives a very meager existence, working as a barista at a diner to pay the rent of a rundown New York apartment with a series of revolving door roommates, working on his musical Suburbia when he has the time. All of this is done to complete Suburbia before the musical is showcased in front of a series of Broadway donors, which may not even amount to anything. Yet at the same time, we see the incredible friendships and relationships that he's fostered with the people in his life, as well as his never-ending optimism. John lives a hard life, but he doesn't live a miserable life. He's not a tortured artist, or at least not in the beginning. He only becomes more tortured as he puts more and more time into his work and his art and spends less time maintaining those relationships to the point where he almost completely loses his relationship with his girlfriend Susan. But those are all plot beats that show up in other biopics, you know? The artist gets lost in their work, it costs them their relationships, ultimately it's all worth it for the glory, yada 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 yada. You get it. But that's where Tick Tick Boom differs. Because after all that sacrifice for Suburbia, all of the sleepless nights, all of the relationships that he near ruins, the day of the showcase arrives, and it goes well. The investors all really like the show. As his agent says,
"Honey, I have heard nothing but raves. All day long I'm getting call after call after call."
Wow. Okay. Yes, that's great news.
Everyone is telling me the same thing. That Jonathan Larson. I can't wait to see what he does next.
What do you mean?
yeah, what he does next. That's gotta hurt. John finds out that it's true. The investors love the show, but they don't want to invest in it. It's too much of a risk. The musical that he's spent years of his life working on, which, you know, doesn't feel great. After all this, John goes to see his best friend Michael, who has moved on to pursue a lucrative job in marketing, a job that John sees as morally questionable and lacking in artistic integrity. He vents to Michael, but in the process discovers that Michael has his own problems that he has been keeping from John.
I understand.
No, you don't understand. I'm running out of time.
You are not running out of time.
You don't know anything about it.
I'm HIV positive.
What?
A lot of this movie has been rather timeless, but another part of it has been really rooted in the year that it takes place, 1990. Notably, in the middle of the AIDS crisis. This has been something that John has been passively aware of, due to his friends being in the musical theater community, and thus a lot of them being also members of the LGBTQ community. However, while it has been seriously affecting the lives of some of Jonathan's other friends, Michael has been Jonathan's best friend for over 20 years. And so this in particular is deeply painful for Jonathan. It also snaps him back to reality that he has been so wrapped up with Suburbia that he hasn't been paying attention to the relationships around him and the fact that he has such limited time with all these people that he cares so deeply about. So pivoting back a bit, the opening number of this movie, 3090, is all about Jonathan's anxiety that in just a few days, he is going to be turning 30 years old, and that he feels like he hasn't really accomplished anything. He hasn't written his great American musical yet. For many people, turning 30 is seen as like this alarm bell, a wake-up call, a warning bell to the fact that you have 10 years before you're no longer considered young. For some people, being 30 is in of itself the end of youth. This reflects onto Jonathan because by the time the movie starts, he has spent his whole life wanting to be a successful Broadway writer. But if he's already 30 and he hasn't done it yet, then how much time does he really have? It's also at this point in the movie where we find out where the title comes from. John describes this anxiety that he has to create something incredible before it's too late, as this ticking. A ticking that he can hear always in the back of his mind. It'll quiet down, you might not even be able to hear it for a while, but it'll always be there. Ticking constantly, a reminder of the time running out. The ticking is just his fear that he won't be able to create something meaningful with the time that he has. And he feels like if he doesn't, his life has amounted to nothing. However, John is ultimately wrong. His life does have meaning. He left an impact. That impact being with the people that he forged those relationships with. I know it all sounds like a little like, oh well, the real masterpiece was the friends we made along the way. But that doesn't make it untrue. It also means that the ticking isn't just this self-imposed pressure to make something great while you still can, but also a reminder that the time you have with those people in your life is limited, especially considering that you don't know when that limit ends. But that isn't to say that you shouldn't pursue your artistic goals, just that it's not your whole life, and that by extension, you are not a failure if your art doesn't reach people, nor if you run out of time to make it perfect. I found this whole movie incredibly relatable because, in simple terms, Jonathan Larson is just like me for real. I don't consider myself an artist anywhere near Jonathan Larson's level, but I too have felt that pressure to create, have heard the ticking, especially in recent months as I've turned 18 and started to notice the time passing by a lot more quickly, which is scary. The movie's message then is something that I can take comfort in, which I imagine is true for other artists and even for other people who are non-artists who watch this movie as well and have felt that same anxiety, have heard the same ticking. Even though this movie is to an extent for fans of Broadway, it's something that can still appeal to anyone because it's about that shared experience. And honestly, that's not even half of it. There is so much more to this movie that I could keep talking about if I felt so inclined. The fact that the music is utterly incredible. The fact that there's this whole other theme of artistic integrity versus commercial stability. How utterly perfect this whole scene is. How much effort they put into recreating everything in Jonathan's life, including his own apartment, which he kept records of, how Stephen Sondheim himself recorded lines for the movie even though he wasn't playing himself, how this is Lin-Manuel Miranda's directorial debut and it looks beautiful, or even how Andrew Garfield just utterly embodies the role of Jonathan Larson. And he learned to sing for it. He was robbed at the Oscars, dude. What are you doing, Academy? You had the perfect opportunity to award excellent biopic acting, and you went for the guy who slapped the presenter. Rant aside, this is a gem of a film. And while I covered so much that was great, and what in particular stuck out to me, there is still so much more to love about it. This isn't like only scratching the surface, like I am digging a little bit more into it, but like there's still a lot more to dig through. And I feel pretty confident in saying that it was my favorite movie that I saw in 2021. And maybe the best? I don't know, Dune was also really good. And 1 year later, it still holds up excellently. Also, it's better than Rent. Thank you all so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed. This movie's just been on my mind so much because of the anniversary, and I just wanted to get my thoughts out on video and just share them all and everything so that I can like get it out into the ether. I'm rounding up the year, and I know that I did not upload at all last December, and I want to change that because money. There should be 2 more videos out before the end of December, so stay tuned for those. Feel free to like the video if you liked it, comment if you have any thoughts, and if you're new, why not subscribe? It's free, and it ensures that you'll see any future uploads of me doing any videos just like this one. And it encourages me to do more videos like this one because, you know, positive feedback and all that. And all around, it just helps me in the channel, so I would really appreciate it. I sincerely hope that all of you have an excellent day, and I guess I'll see you in the next video. Bye!
I may be spoken to her 5 times in my entire life. I say none of this.